Hello! Ohayo gozaimasu! And welcome to today's Naruse A Day review. And today I am looking at one of the great director's most internationally acclaimed and, at least in the West, well-known films, When a Woman Ascends the Stairs. This was a film that the Criterion Collection were quite ahead of the curve in releasing some years ago now. It might actually have been the very first Naruse film that I saw, but it has remained one of his sort of touchstone women's films or melodramas from the 1950s, and has continued to be one of the key films that people have referred to, that people analyze, that people rank amongst their favorite Naruse films. So let's dive in and have a look at this very interesting sort of generic hybrid. The title "When a Woman Ascends the Stairs" refers to those moments in the film when the protagonist has to climb a staircase in order to reach the bar at which she works. And it is those moments, as she says in a voiceover narration, that give her pause for thought, that sort of sharpen her feelings one way or the other, whether to carry on with the sort of drudgery of her life. She really does struggle with the life that she leads. She says at one point that it is no life at all, and that it is full of trials and tribulations. Whether to struggle on, whether to rise the staircase, ascend the staircase, or whether to leave it all behind, whether to stay at the bottom, stay part of the world outside. Her reflections on this world also form part of her narration, which kind of guides us through the film in some ways. It's sporadically peppering the soundtrack and serves in a very interesting way to kind of make us, the audience, something like a confidant. She pours her heart out about her work, her indecisions. She talks a lot about the different levels of being a bar hostess. She talks about the city around her. She talks about what the city looks like, how different hostesses move around the city. And it's almost like she is unloading herself to us, making us very sort of intimate with her, making us privy to thoughts and feelings that she otherwise feels, for the most part, obliged to sort of suppress, to squash down beneath a layer of what her business demands is polite sort of interaction. She says at one point that she has to treat all men with whom she comes into professional contact as lovers, and this demands a very prescient, very pressing sense of burying her real feelings. The conflict here is one that is actually very familiar within Japanese culture and Japanese cinema. It's one that animates a majority of Yakuza films, for instance, or samurai films. The conflict between what are known as giri and ninjo. The conflict between, on the one hand, social obligations, social expectations, the way one is obliged to appear in front of others and interact with others, and the sort of real feelings that often fester beneath the surface because of the facade that one is obliged to put on. There is a very strong sense of a modern world here, a modern urban landscape. There are numerous shots in and around Tokyo, particularly the Ginza district, as is typical of Naruse, kind of embedding us within a very specific landscape. There is also a very striking sort of almost jazz-like score that feels in some ways as though it is offering its own commentary on the sort of isolation and alienation of the lives of the women, particularly the women whom we come into contact in various ways through the story of Takamine Hideko's Mama-san. It is in some ways and in places almost a score that could be music, that could be the sort of background ambient music, the diegetic music that we hear being played in the various bars that occupy the vast majority of the narrative. So with these slight atonal jazz-like twists, it's a score that very subtly sort of comments on the struggles, the tribulations inherent in this world. It is a world, interestingly, mapped out by Naruse through the norms of different genres. Typically, Naruse is thought of as a woman's film director. This, on occasion, has nods towards melodrama. And indeed here, I think there is quite a lot that bespeaks melodrama. Even a transnational model of melodrama, well known perhaps to some from films by, say, Douglas Sirk or Vincent Minnelli or Nicholas Ray, being made around this time in Hollywood. In particular, the prevalence of The Staircase leads us to the Hollywood melodrama. The Staircase, as several critics have pointed out at length and analysed in detail, is a favoured, almost hallowed prop or space in the Hollywood melodrama. It is a site of liminality between different spheres, between different emotional states. And so it is here, given the way that it gives the protagonist pause for thought, and seems to separate the quote-unquote real life of the city, of her private life, and the professional space that she occupies and is so disenfranchised by. At the same time as the melodrama rears its head, there's also an intriguing sort of film noir-like aspect to the film. Indeed, we might almost call this a melonoirma. It's a very nocturnal film in a lot of ways. The hostesses lead nocturnal lives. And a lot of the shots in and around the city and the urban spaces that embed us in these lives are taken at night and are replete with the kind of shots of modern architecture and particular high contrast, low key black and white photography that bespeaks something of at least the style of the film noir. Again, nods to Hollywood films. Also, the prevalence of money, of women needing money, and relations with men that are based on a kind of transactional imperative. This is something that kind of constructs the downtrodden protagonist here as something like mirror images of the classic archetypical femme fatale of the Hollywood film noir. So there is this intriguing sort of transnational style to the film that feels new to Naruse, but is very much at home with, I think, some of the tenets of his cinema as it had developed to this point. When A Woman Ascends the Stairs was made at Toho Studios, this had been Naruse's cinematic home for over 20 years. He had worked for the forerunner of Toho in the mid-30s, PCL, Photochemical Laboratories. But this marks one of the first times that he had worked in their patented Toho scope format, the 2:35:1 aspect ratio, mirroring CinemaScope, and also saw him working with a wider array of this studio's stock company of actors. Most obvious here is Nakadai Tatsuya, already famous from the works of Kurosawa Akira. He would go on to star and topline Kagemusha and as Lord Hidetora in Ran. He plays essentially the Mama-san's manager here, the man who looks after the accounts at her bar, and who is secretly in love with her. This offers a really interesting sort of mirror of the Mama-san's own largely unrequited, though shared, feelings for one of her patrons, a banker, played by Mori Masayuki. Again, there's an interesting charge here because this is the same pair, that is Takamine Hideko and Mori Masayuki, who starred in Naruse's earlier film Floating Clouds, in which they play a couple who, despite their love for and need of one another, never really managed to fully consummate their relationship. So there's an interesting intertextual charge here, and although the narrative isn't structured or doesn't play out in the same way as Floating Clouds, it does actually have something of that film's very poignant melancholy, the sense of lives drifting on and love passing by. Also, it must be said that the Toho scope format, the widescreen format, is something that Naruse makes particularly good use of here, not just in exteriors, but also in interior scenes. There are some really striking compositions in dialogue scenes in which Naruse balances two figures at either end of the first plane of the image with figures in the center of the frame, the center of the composition, further back on the third plane of the image, creating a striking image in depth, and also subtly reinforcing something of the relationships and the power structures of the characters on screen. Overall, this is Naruse pushing what had become a familiar style, a familiar genre, and familiar themes into slightly new territory here. So for that reason alone, it is very much worth your time. So do endeavour to check it out. Like, comment, subscribe, or dislike, don't comment and don't subscribe. Follow me on X at Adam Bingham01 and look out for more videos, both reviews of Naruse films and indeed many others on many other topics.